All right, today is the day that we get started on your project pitch. And so I'm going to walk you through the steps that you need to do. This is due by Friday, one per group if you're working with a partner. And so you're working with your title, your thesis statement, and quotes from secondary and primary sources in order to support that argument that you set out yesterday in your thesis statement. What we're looking for in this pitch are cartoons, illustrations, paintings, newspapers, advertisements. These are all primary sources. Photographs are generally the easiest documents to find, and I'm totally okay with you having 5 photos in your project pitch. So step 1 is to start by writing your narrative, and we'll have a separate video about how to do that. But next, I'm going to walk you through how to plug in some visuals and primary sources. And please be aware that if something is fuzzy, if you get stuck, don't get stuck on the title and not move on. Don't get stuck on the thesis. Fill in the parts you can fill in so that it's as complete as possible by Friday. So to start with, you're going to come up with a title. So my title for this project is The Hello Girls and the Battle for Equality. A simple title is fine at this point. We can make it fancier later. This is my thesis statement. So before World War I, the United States military created barriers which limited opportunities for women in the military. The Hello Girls broke those barriers by risking their lives supporting the U.S. Army on the battlefront of World War I as telephone operators. This matters because women won a small battle in the fight for equality, and today, women still fight for equal treatment in the military. All right, our next step is to figure out what image could we use to establish historical context. So I'm going to have to put an image into the box on the left, and then I'm also going to have to put information in the box on the right. So for this part of the story, I want to establish for my audience that the barrier was formed because women were not allowed to be on the battlefront in danger during wars. And so a way that I would look that up is I'm thinking of the Civil War, and women were on the battlefront as nurses. So a great example of that, well, not necessarily the battlefront, but as close as they could get, would be Clara Barton in the Spanish-American War. So not really the Civil War. So I went to imagequest and I searched for her, but I could have searched for nurses as well. And then we're going to paste that in to our document. So just going to cover up the box. And we want to keep track of our sources is one thing that we need to do with each image. And we also need to give a little bit of explanation. So when we're in imagequest, we want to click the Cite button, and that gives us everything we need for our bibliography at the end of the project. And so you should have a document open that you could paste this into to keep track of your sources. If you look at the very first page of the project pitch, it does tell you to make 2 lists in your bibliography to keep track of primary and secondary sources. So this illustration is an example of a primary source, and so that's the part of the list that will go into. Okay, so I've made a new document, and it says annotated bibliography at the top, and I have a spot for my secondary sources here, and we said that this image that we just copied is a primary source. So I'm going to paste that in, and I also want to make a note right now of how I use the source, just so I don't forget to do that later. So we would say something like, this image helped my audience to see the roles women played on the battlefront before World War I. Okay, so back in the project pitch, it says over here there's a little bit of writing to do. So you're trying to tell us, why did you pick this picture? So I chose this image because it helps my audience understand this about how the barrier was formed. So what is it helping us to understand about the barrier? So you have to know your barrier. In my case, the barrier is women not being allowed to be in all positions in conflict, in war. And so I'm trying to, in 1 to 2 sentences, make clear how this image helps us understand that. All right, so here's the explanation I came up with in 2 sentences. Clara Barton helped soldiers as a nurse during the Civil War. Before World War I, women could serve as nurses if they wanted to help with the war. Okay, that's the context. We're understanding who was involved in the barrier. Clara Barton wasn't, but how it was established. The next slide in the project pitch is about build up. So thinking about what opportunities or obstacles led to the barrier being broken. So what opportunities started to occur and what obstacles got in the way, because there's often people who don't want barriers broken. So as far as an opportunity that I'm thinking of is the suffrage movement was really taking off before the war started. So this is an example of a woman who's in England working to sell newspapers to soldiers. So it kind of establishes two opportunities, but also obstacles. So the opportunity for women to be treated equal and get the right to vote, but also an obstacle that got in the way there was World War I. So that is something I can use in this slide, and then I'll have to explain it. So two steps that I need to follow now after pasting it in. I need to cite it in my bibliography, and then I need to write an explanation of what I want to talk about in this section. Okay, I thought about it. Here's my explanation. When World War I started in 1914, women in the United States were fighting for the right to vote. The war was an obstacle because some considered it treason to protest the government during war. The war was an opportunity because some women could serve their country and prove what they could do. So that's build up. My next step is to fill in a timeline, and this was a weakness for some of us on the history breakdown. And so we need to take our time and really think about how to put in both dates and events here. I know the first date that I want to put into my timeline is the actual Hello Girls being called for. So General Pershing calls on women to volunteer to be operators. This first happens in 1918. I think a date would be more helpful, a really specific date, but even if that's all I had to work with, now I can work backwards and talk about what were the events leading up to that. And then to show impact of a barrier being broken here, I'm going to need to fill in some dates afterwards. I'm going to quickly just walk you through what the rest of the project pitch is, and then I'll make a second video about how to do the timeline. The next step is the focus of when the barrier broke. I'm going to ask you for an image here, and then to fill in, just tell me who, what, when, where, and how. Make sure I'm not missing any details of what you're talking about. Impact is what happened as a result of this barrier being broken, just short term, probably not more than 10 years after the event happened. And then finally, the last slide is the significance or long-term change. So how are you going to tell us why we should care about this topic still today? So as we're doing this, we're looking for images using imagequest. And at the same time, we have to have open our bibliography, keeping track of our sources as we go so that we have them at the end of the project. And that is the start of our project pitch, which is due the last day before winter break.